DIY homesteading at Missouri River Regional Library. Today we're outside and we're talking about raised bed gardening. Now, I'm a huge fan of raised bed gardening for a lot of reasons, mainly because they're higher off the ground, they don't have the weeds, and they're easier to maintain. But you can do raised beds out of a lot of things, and we're going to talk about a couple of them today. There's lots of ways you can do raised beds, and no way is really wrong. As long as you have good soil, good drainage, and the perfect container, that's your raised bed. Behind me, you can see some multiple examples of different kinds of raised beds. We bought these stock troughs from a local feed store, and these are our herb beds now. And look how beautiful that is. That is gorgeous. We have all kinds of herbs in here. We also have these mineral tanks from feeding cattle that we have lettuce and radishes and tomatoes in. And then we did some salad pots as well this year. Now, this isn't technically a raised bed because it's really just in a pot, but it's an example of how you can garden. It's got lettuce, radish, and onions in it as well. So how do you fill this big thing? You're probably looking at this huge tank and you're thinking, man, that is a lot of dirt in there. It's really not. We use what is called hugelkultur. It's a German way of creating good soil, basically. The bottom, probably 2 feet of this, is full of brush. So you go out to the woods, you collect some brush, you cut down a tree, trim your bushes and trees around your house, and you collect that wood, and then you use it in the bottom of your container. And then we've put mulch in and filled in all the spaces between the wood. We have a big city mulch pile down the road from us, and we just take the tractor, go get a big scoop of it, and fill it in. If you don't have access to a giant pile of mulch in a tractor, you can get it from numerous spots. You can get mulch in bags. You can get it from different garden supply stores. There's lots of ways to get different mulch. You can even create it yourself. You know, if you have a wood chipper, chip up some of your excess wood and stuff. And then only about 8 to 10 inches of this is soil. And that is plenty of room to grow your veggies and herbs and whatever else you're growing in there. We have a mixture of soil, peat moss, and compost in the top of that to just give us some really good soil in here. And I'm going to show you how to make these beds. But I do want to rave about the benefits of raised bed gardening. Now, if you have a traditional garden in the ground, you know that it's a lot of work. And we have one up here that we'll show you here in a little bit. I live on my parents' property and I'm helping them garden. They have a traditional garden. And it's a big plot of ground that you plow up in the spring, and then you disc, and then you till, and then you have to work it into rows and plant your seeds or your plants, and then you have to maintain it. There's always weeds in an in-ground garden, always weeds. You till between your rows, or you hoe between them to loosen up the soil. So there's a lot of maintenance that goes on in an in-ground garden. Not to say that you don't get great vegetables out of there, because you do. But if you have a raised bed like this or some other container, you don't have to plow it, you don't have to disc it, you don't have to till it. It's all loose soil because you haven't walked on it. So when you have an in-ground garden, to maintain it, to weed it, to pick your produce, you're walking on the soil, and that compacts it down, and that's not really good for the soil because you want nice loose soil. So this is great because you don't have to have any kind of machinery for it. Once you have it in place, it's in place. Weeds don't tend to travel that high up. So if you have, you know, your garden in the ground, it's level with all your grass and your weeds and all the seeds that can blow into it, and then you get weeds everywhere. Not to say that you will never get a weed in a raised bed, because you will, but you won't get the quantity that you do in a garden, at an in-ground garden. You also don't have to lean over. I don't know about you, but I'm getting older. My parents are definitely older than me, and leaning down to not only maintain your vegetables, but to harvest them can be a pain in the back, literally. And so with a raised bed, it's at the right height that you can just reach over and harvest. You don't have to worry about bending down and lifting big baskets or buckets full of produce. You don't have to worry about waiting until your soil warms up in the spring, because your soil in your containers is going to warm up a lot faster than the soil in the ground. Your ground is ground temperature, of course, and that may be till March, April, when it's warm enough to plant. Whereas these, you could put a cover on them, warm them up, and start planting in February. This year was a weird year with all the rain we had this spring. We actually didn't get garden out until into May. So we didn't have any spring vegetables. We didn't have any peas or lettuces in tubs because we couldn't get it into the garden. It was just too wet. And with a raised bed, you don't have to worry about that because it will dry out. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to have to water it more frequently, because it doesn't have the ground source water that your in-ground garden will have. So you'll have to keep these watered. But I think the benefits definitely outweigh the small, very tiny little bit of negatives. You do want to make sure you have adequate drainage. I will say that this yellow mineral tank that we have lettuce in, we didn't get enough drainage holes in it. And all the rain we had at the end of April, it kind of flooded out. So luckily it has recovered. We went back and drilled some extra holes in it, but do make sure you have adequate drainage. These, they come with one drainage hole, but we also drilled holes in the base of them so that it would drain out. Now, your wood and sticks and logs at the bottom of here are also going to help your drainage, because your water is going to go down through your soil into the mulch layer and then into the wood layer, and it'll just keep seeping down. And so you don't have a big mound of soil that is going to absorb all that water and just keep it there and get you all icky. But yeah, so let's talk about hugelkultur. So hugelkultur, I didn't realize what this was called until a friend of mine, Margot. If you watch all these videos, you know Margot and her husband Charles live in the dome. Last year they did a video for us about dome living, and she was like, oh, I was telling her about this process, and she was like, oh, you do hugelkultur. And I was like, what is hugelkultur? And so I looked it up, and it's an ancient way of doing gardening, and it's raised mounds. So in hugelkultur, you don't necessarily put it in containers all the time. You could just do it on the ground. So you could build a trench, fill it with tree trunks and logs and everything, and get it several feet off the ground. And then you layer smaller sticks and mulch and compost on top of it until you have a mound that could be 6 feet high, which, okay, I'm 5 foot, so 6 feet high. And it's a kind of almost a pyramid shape with a flat top. And then you have soil on all 3 sides of that pyramid, and you could plant all 3 sides. You could even plant a tree on there if it's big enough. So I looked it up. I was fascinated. That's basically what we were doing. We had talked about doing lasagna gardening, which is another method for doing raised bed. It is kind of a layering method where you do green and brown compost materials in layers. So you may start with cardboard, and then mulch, and then leaves, and then sticks and soil, you know, so you're just making these layers and doing that as your base. Any way you fill a container is fine, as long as you have adequate materials and adequate drainage. Those are my big points for that. So let's go see what hugelkultur is all about as we fill some tanks. Okay, so we're in the garden, and as you can see behind me, we do still have an in-ground garden. These are not cheap, so we're doing this as a slower project to transition from in-ground to raised beds. Now, the other reason we're doing is last year we got a tomato fungus, and the tomato fungus stays in the ground for 3 years. So you can't plant anything that is affected by the fungus in 3 years. So, because it's tomato, it means everything in the nightshade family. So, no tomatoes, no peppers, no potatoes, no sweet potatoes. Yeah, all your favorite things. So we are doing alternate methods so we can still plant those things. But we do still have a few things in the ground, and we will until we transition to a full container garden up here. So These are slightly bigger than the ones we did with the herbs. They're a little bit wider and a little bit longer. They are still stock tanks. We bought them from Orscheln's. And you don't want your containers to be probably wider than 4 feet. So if you are a fan of square foot gardening, the square foot gardening rule basically is that you do 4 feet, 4 feet by 4 feet. And 4 feet is about as far as you can reach in from all sides. So the purpose of raised beds is not to have something that you walk through, and we don't want to compact the soil here. So 4 feet is about as wide as you want. These are about 3 feet wide, so you can definitely reach all sides of them. So we have 3 of them here, and they're in various stages of completion. Now you can see we did put quite a layer of mulch underneath these to stabilize the ground, because this was part of the in-ground garden, and so it was just plowed soil. So there is a good foot or so of mulch underneath them as a platform. Okay, you can see this tank has been filled. It is complete, and we've planted tomatoes and carrots in here. This was the first one we did here in the garden. It's full of branches and then mulch and then our soil on top, and we've got it planted. We just did this one a few days ago, so it's just got some little baby tomatoes, and the carrots haven't started coming up yet. This is our in-between tank. So we have it filled with branches and mulch, and it is ready for the soil now. You can tell that it needs about, a foot or so of soil on top of it, and we will do a mix of compost, peat moss, and soil to make it a great planting medium. So we're going to start from scratch on this one and show you the process of how we fill this up and get it ready for planting. All right, we have now filled this tank with brush. We had a tree that's dying. We went down and trimmed it today and had a truckload of branches and just kindling size. There are a few bigger logs down in the bottom. Not huge logs because the tree isn't that big that we're cutting down, but you can see it is filled with branches, and we are now at the stage where we're going to put mulch on top of it. All right, now we're filling the tub with some mulch and the problem with city mulch piles is always that there's going to be trash in there, because people are not super considerate when they take things to the city mulch pile. So we will have to dig some of that trash out. Okay, so what you can see is we have spread out the mulch, and we are working it down in between the sticks. You can see my mom is using another stick just to work it down in there. The sticks have a lot of air between them, if they weren't completely packed down. So you want to get the mulch down in between all those air pockets. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of settling as the mulch, or as the tree branches break down, which you're definitely going to have anyway, but you want to lessen that by making sure you're as full as possible here. All right, this is the second load of mulch, and it should be plenty on that tank. We've gotten the first load kind of down in between the branches, and this one will even out, and then we'll be ready for soil on this tank as well. Okay, so this tank is now full of mulch, and we're getting ready to put the dirt and peat moss and compost on it. I did want to let you know that if you don't have a lot of brush to put in here, you can fill it with other things like pine cones. Pine cones would be a fantastic base on the bottom here, or acorns, nutshells. I wouldn't do rocks because they're not going to break down. You do want organic material, but there's a variety of ways you can fill that thing up. All right, so now we have put a load of dirt into the tub. We have a dirt pile, and Dad just brought the tractor with the scoop of dirt and filled it up. We're going to mix this with compost and peat moss. All right, so the beds are ready to plant. We have a big scoop of dirt in there. We put half a bag of peat moss, so about a cubic foot of peat moss, and a bag and a half of cow manure compost. You can use any kind of compost you want. You can make your own. You can purchase it. There's all kinds of compost options out there if you just check around. But these are ready to plant, just like this one. And so we're going to get those planted up and put some irrigation in them, and they'll be ready to go. We have two other examples of raised beds on our property that show different stages of how we've done this. This one right here, you can tell, is super overgrown. We don't have anything in it right now except for a raspberry bush that needs to be pulled out. We are going to redo that this year. It was done with these big telephone pole ties and filled with dirt. It's settled. It's mostly grass now. It's not super useful, so we're going to redo that one this year. This one is our strawberry bed, and it's about 3 years old. And it's a wood one. Now, we chose not to do wood this year because wood prices are outrageously expensive, as you are probably aware. So it's actually it's the same price for the stock tanks as it would be for lumber for the raised beds, but you didn't have to put them together. So if you take into labor, the stock tanks are actually a little less expensive. But this is our strawberry bed, and if we can get close to it, you can see that 3 years in, the soil has settled, and we've probably got a good foot of space between the soil and the top of the bed here. Now, this is not the time of year to move strawberries. They are blooming. You can see we have strawberries set on in there. We've started picking strawberries, so we picked them this morning, so there's no red ones in here really, but so probably at the end of the season, we will dig up all of these strawberries and we will fill this back up with soil and then replant the strawberries. And the strawberries need to be thinned anyway. This is a pretty full bed. So it's a good time to do that after they're done blooming. And we'll just refill this bed, put them back in there, straw them for fall, and it will be good. But these have done so much better than... We had a previous bed that wasn't very far off the ground, and they didn't do that well. They got a lot of weeds in them, dandelions especially. Now, this does have some weeds in it. I can see a couple of them right off the bat. You can probably see it too there in the camera, but it is much easier to maintain at this height. It is probably 2 foot tall, I would say, but it's a good bed. Thank you for joining us for another edition of DIY Homesteading with Missouri River Regional Library. I hope you have not gotten as hot and sweaty as I have today with this, but we have 3 full garden beds, all done, all planted, ready to go. So this one here, this is the one that we started from scratch on today, and we have cantaloupe that we're going to train up on our cattle panel here, a couple of tomatoes on the ends, peppers, and then some marigolds just to brighten it up and to keep bugs away. And then this one was the one that was finished. It still has tomatoes, carrots, and radishes in it. And then we put a marigold in there, of course. And then this was the partial one. And this one isn't as exciting because we planted some seeds in here. We have cucumbers here that we're going to train up over our cattle panel. And then we have zucchini and acorn squash in the front that will hopefully bush out, and we'll have some lovely vegetables this year. So I hope you've learned something about container gardening. I mean, the main thing is that it's fairly easy. It didn't take us but a couple hours to do this, and we even ran and bought plants. So it makes it super easy to harvest your crop. I mean, my zucchini, imagine there's a zucchini plant here, and I just picked the zucchinis. I don't have to bend down or anything. And we shouldn't have any weeds in here. And next year we'll just add a little bit more compost to the top and it'll be good to go. I mean, it's super easy. You can make, remember, you can make raised beds out of just about anything. These are stock troughs. You can make them out of lumber. Use untreated lumber. You can make them out of rock, stone, things, you know, if you have some metal that you have around that you want to build containers out of, whatever you have. You know, the nice thing about container gardening is it's not a one size fits all. It's every size fits everything. So experiment, try it out, and enjoy your harvest you get.